Hi everyone, how's everybody doing? I managed to just spend time in the last session together with Cynthia, just listening in. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm just going to just scroll through and see everybody. If you can give me a wave, that will be great. Awesome. I can see all those waving with just your name. It's been really great just being able to be involved in this. And I'm just waiting to see if we're going to be spotlighting the speakers. I'll just wait for the tech site to get going. This session is really a panel on new leadership real life stories. What we're going to do is to make this as conversational as possible, to make it as fun as possible. We have two really great speakers with us in Georgette and David. As we are getting this going, let me just very quickly introduce our speakers. Georgette is the president of UN Women Singapore, United Women Singapore, an NGO advocating gender equality, women's empowerment, and focus on building the pipeline of future female leaders. Prior to this, Georgette was the senior vice president of communications, heading up the communication and CSR at MasterCard Asia Pacific. Her career includes heading communication roles in both the private and public sectors in Singapore and Hong Kong, including CNBC Asia, Dow Jones Asia, Hong Kong Trade Development Council, Singapore Tourism Board, and Sentosa Development Corporation. So if you ever want to know where the fun places are in Sentosa, she's the person to ask.
Martin, you just made me sound really, really old.
No, she did this all in the span of 10 working years. Our second speaker is David. David Chua was appointed the Chief Executive Officer of the National Youth Council in July 2015, becoming the autonomous agency's first CEO. NYC was restructured into autonomous agency under the MCCY in January 2015 and operates as a national body coordinating holistic youth development. It also houses Outbound Singapore and the Youth Corps Singapore. David is also concurrently the chairman of SCAPE. And he served in the Singapore Armed Forces for 22 years. So we are having two really great speakers. My name is Martin Tan. I currently run the Majority Trust, which is a philanthropic organization. Prior to this, I have the privilege to be working at SMU with the Institute for Societal Leadership. And then before that, I started an organization in 2003 called the Halogen Foundation, where I served as the ED for 10 years before they fired me, before they kicked me out because I was too old, Georgette. Being a youth organization, we really wanted the team to be young. So I lived past a certain age and they say, you know what, Martin, it's time to hand over to the next generation. So 3 stories, just spending time together with you. As I've said before, we really want this to be as conversational as possible. This is not a one-way traffic, so please, if you can, just make sure that you can ask questions, put in the chat function, and I'll collate the questions and I'll put it to the panel. I thought I'll start off our session really talking about the frame in which we will be really talking about new leadership. We spent some time with the Ashoka folks, and I kind of like how they frame new leadership, which is the collective action and inclusive responsibility for all working towards a shared goal. I think that's really cool. The idea of collective action, the idea of inclusive responsibility, the idea of building team of teams. Diana Wells, who's the president of Ashoka, wrote this in an article in Ashoka. She said that to successfully lead in a complex environment, the core role of a leader shifts to nurturing an environment for change makers to emerge. The core role of a leader shifts to nurturing an environment for change makers to emerge. Part of nurturing others to lead requires overcoming personal and organizational egos to listen, trust, and share leadership. It requires self-awareness and openness, not only for change externally, but for change internally. For some of you who knows the Halogen Foundation, we spend a lot of time working with you young leaders. And there's one program that we like a lot, and I really loved this definition of leadership by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner in the Leadership Challenge, which is that leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspiration. Leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspiration. And the reason why I'm using these 3 quotes to really frame our sessions together is because we are talking about new leadership. And when there's new leadership, one of the questions that we had in the previous sessions about all leadership. So we will come to that later in the session. But really, with the speakers that we have, they come from very diverse backgrounds. Georgette comes from MasterCard, and now she's leading an international NGO that's based in Singapore. And then with David, with National Youth Council, but also with his military experience. What I have asked for them is to take the next 3 to 5 minutes to really share their perspective. And by a unanimous vote, we decided to ask David to go first because of his background as a military officer. He's trained in the UK. One of the key conversations that we will be having is really thinking about the paradigm of leadership. And for many of you who are still students or young people, and when you look at leaders, we tend to look at leaders we aspire towards, or we tend to look at leadership that we recognize and understand. Military is a really interesting place because it's a rank and file place. There's generals, and then there's majors, and there's a very hierarchical organization. But at the same time, the way the military function may not be as similar to what we think it is. So David, I thought we can start with you to share from your perspective, both 22 years as a military person and now really leading a national entity called the National Youth Council. If you can, the next 3 to 5 minutes, the floor is all yours. Thanks for spending time with us. Over to you, Bro.
Thank you, Martin, and hi, everyone. Maybe I'll just start by saying that the military also mobilizes for a shared objective and uses collective action. I'll just summarize my 22 years in the word BAD, B-A-D. So the military is big, it's aggressive, and it's decisive. So if you think about large organizations, you probably need a leadership style that's able to galvanize a large organization. And if you think about the mission of the military, we're trained to be guard dogs. We're not trained to dilly-dally and take our time. So time is of the essence. Decisions need to be taken quickly, not really questioned in times of exigencies or emergencies. So it has to be aggressive. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of why we exist at all. Second, it must be decisive, like I said. So structures and processes are designed for leaders to be able to make a decisive action and mobilize decisively. But that being said, right, the Singapore military organizes ourselves in that bad way, not in a literally bad, but like I said, it takes into cognizance the big, large organization, the nature of our work in terms of being aggressive and being able to deter and being decisive. There are a few things there that we need to think about. So 2 things I like about my military past. One is that it is very ground and reality based. The essence of the military also is that we try and understand what the soldiers in the trenches go through before we draw the big arrows to say get here from point A to point B. There are many conditional factors and uncertainties that are brought to bear as long as you have an ear to the ground and you understand the ground sentiments and the conditions of the soldier before you think about what you can do as an organization. The second one is that because there's so many layers and it is large, actually there is an intent-based kind of leadership where we focus more on the outcomes and we try and get the soldiers to understand 2 levels of command upwards. We call it high HQ intent, so that we don't try and overly define the tactical actions and decisions. But as long as you get to the same outcome, but because maybe conditions have changed, assumptions have changed, you are allowed to deviate tactically. So I'll just leave it as that kind of old leadership paradigm. Where I think things are shifting towards today is what I call ABC. So leadership that aligns, leadership that bridges, and leadership that builds compact. And I'll just elaborate a little bit. When I talk about alignment, I mean alignment by intent and outcomes. And that speaks to the earlier point I spoke about, intent-based leadership. Defining the intent and the outcome more clearly so that you can empower and give autonomy. But you guide by strategic intent. You don't just simply empower and give autonomy with all kinds of open parameters, because that's quite dangerous. And teams are actually also looking for guidance, central planning guidance, strategic planning guidance, if you call it. So leadership must help to align through intent and outcomes. Second, leadership must also bridge. And what I mean by that is that it has to be inclusive. It probably has to be more distributed today and more reliant on partners. And that involves a lot of trust building. So the ability to bridge across groups, different diverse voices is important. And also bridging in the sense that today you see a lot of intersectionalities, whether it's between disciplines or domains. So a leadership that can traverse and bring the different aspects to bear on a solution is important. The third one is compact. There are two C's here that I toy around with, and one is to do with seeding space and at the same time building compact. So a leadership that kind of seeds space and creates space for authentic partnership and ownership so that the social compact is stronger. Compact is something that goes beyond trust. And that kind of compact will sustain an organization for the longer term. So even in the military, when we talk about trust, actually what we're after is a compact that has a desired outcome and end state in mind. So again, just quickly summarizing from the bad to the ABCs, but there are some things from the bad that we can incorporate into the ABCs as well. Thanks, Martin. Over back to you.
That's really awesome. I was hoping whether you have one for ERP, but that's another thing altogether. I love the two C's between compact, and especially the second one you were toying with, which is the idea of seeding space, because a lot of leadership has that tough component to it, right? That this is my response, this is my space, and which is why I would like Diana's earlier quote, which that it has a lot to do with ego to a certain extent. The ability to seed space is the ability to put aside and say, you know what, it's not just about me, but in your words, it's really about the intent, right? What is the intent? What is the goal? And if by seeding space we reach our intent, then I'm exercising leadership. So I love that tremendously. Thanks for that. Georgette, over to you.
Okay, I've just unmuted myself. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Martin. Hey, tough act to follow after David. Okay. But okay, so here it goes. As you alluded, I started out kind of in the public sector space. Right? I actually worked for both Singapore government and quasi agency, government agency in Hong Kong. So I came from this rather structured, very disciplined environment, right, where it was very much, and we're talking several decades here ago now, where it was very old school. You took instructions, you carried out the instructions, and then you obviously, you did postmortems and then fed it back up again, right? So it was that structured environment. And then I moved into private sector. So that was, to me, a move away from that structure. And don't get me wrong, I loved the structure. I'm so glad I had that opportunity to have that grounding, that structure, because then I used that into the commercial space, the private sector space, right? And what I found was there, it was all about shared vision, shared objectives, but the goal, everybody had a goal, which was obviously top performance. It was driven by performance. Now, it was still hierarchical. It was very much, there was the senior management, and the senior management made the decisions with the view that this was in the interest of the larger group. So, and it worked. It worked, and all the companies that I've worked for, did well, and it worked. And then subsequently, I moved from there to the nonprofit space, right? So interestingly, the nonprofit space actually is a combination of both. It is literally at the back end that structure, it's not rigidity, it's about structure, it's about being disciplined, it's about accountability, it's about governance. You've got to have that. If you don't have that, it's not going to work. Okay, but the new nonprofits, right, and the new leadership in nonprofits know that it's not just a matter of sit back and wait for donations to come in. You've got to go out there. You've got to have a commercial lens. You've got to think about what's the landscape. You've got to apply all those business concepts that one acquires over the years or reads about anyway, all right, learns in school, and apply that with a commercial outlook. So it literally is both at the same time. So in terms of that's really my path. And you know, we are actually a local based nonprofit, and our focus is Singapore. And for us, we moved away from UN Women to become United Women here in Singapore. And in doing so, we actually became like a startup. We had to start all over again. And my daughter actually said to me, she says, you know, you're like a founder. You have to start with that mentality. Which goes to show, you know, it's never too late. And even in old age, right, you can do this. But let me at this point play off David's ABC, okay? Let me add on a D. How is that? Okay, I'm going to add a D, and I'm going to say, I think it's also about dialogue. Okay, it is dialogue. Well, C was taken, so I was going to say communication, but no, it's dialogue because it has to be two-way, and that's all about the new. It's not one-directional anymore. It is definitely about dialogue, feeding back. And I think our younger generation, our new leaders understand, our pipeline of new leaders understand that that's the only way to operate. It is about dialogue and not being afraid of the dialogue, right? Not being afraid of ramifications, right? And let me put an E to that, right? In addition to the T, let's put energy. Okay, it's about a different type of energy. It's about fire in the belly. And I guess it relates to purpose-driven, right? It does relate back to alignment and the shared objectives. But it is a certain type of energy because this energy has to come from within and it has to generate not for yourself, but for others too. So so David, thank you for the ABC. I'm just adding a D and an E to it.
How about an F?
Wait. Fire. Fire in the belly. That's what she said.
There you
I'll
go.
take that as an F, Georgette.
Okay, good enough.
No, that's brilliant. I love the idea of dialogue. A friend of mine wrote a book called The Art of a Wise Leader. He's a Kiwi management consultant. His name is Dr. Mark Strom, S-T-R-O-M. I probably use this quote in leadership development, probably more than any other quote, right? He basically says it. He said that communication is the sharing of created meaning. Conversation is the creating of shared meaning. So let me repeat that for everyone, right? Communication is the sharing of created meaning. Conversation is the creating of shared meaning. I've always loved that quote, and Georgia, I love the idea of dialogue because sometimes in leadership, we tend to go into any team meetings with already formulated ideas and formulated plans, and we go into meetings really intent to communicate what we have already thought about. But we don't spend a lot of time to engender better ideas or listen or to really have a conversation or a dialogue in this case with another party to say, hey, I want to hear your points of view, right?
And you're absolutely right. It's not just about listening, it's about hearing, right? It's taking it to that level and being able to really immerse yourself in it. And it has to be two ways.
Yeah, I agree with that fully. Hey, Georgette, you were sharing the different stage of your life, right? All within 10 years. So I'm very mindful of that. So, all within 1 decade of your career.
I owe you coffee for that anytime.
I mean, we have a lot of young people on this call. And I'm wondering if we all have the magic wand and we all can be mentored by you. So we are probably 18 to 25 round about this call. Would you give different advice to different young people in different sector, or will you give them the same advice? So say, for example, if I'm working in the corporate sector, will you give me a different advice compared to me working in a non-profit sector? or if I'm working in the public sector? I thought I'd be curious to start with you with it.
I think fundamentally there's going to be the same baseline, all right? But I think, like, you can't cookie cutter it. You still, at the end of the day, it's got to be based on the individual and what the individual wants or aspires to, and really, has the mindset for. I think that's really important, because that's going to determine what she or he is going to do. Right? And the flexibility and the agility with which she or he is going to move forward. So I think, so like I said, baseline, there's going to be a foundational piece, but at the same time, I think there's going to be different layers adding on as and when, along the path, life cycle, really.
Cool. And David, if I would pose that same question, right? You have also been to an extent, okay, private sector, skip private sector. What would your advice, or would you have a similar or maybe slightly different advice?
I would have a slightly different take on that. And I think today, apart from the baseline that Georgette is talking about, and I love her idea for dialogue. Yeah. The complement to dialogue is actually deep listening. So dialogue and deep listening.
So actually, you matched my D. Nice there.
Yes.
Like that.
Yeah.
It's like poker. I raise you a deep. It's like poker. I raise you a deep listening.
Precisely. I raise you a D.
But I think that is absolutely important and spot on, because as you dialogue, you're actually doing deep listening, and actually in your application of trying to lead or influence or bring impact. And actually, what I've learned, not just from the military, but as I entered the space, trying to listen to youth voices, trying to listen to government voices, trying to listen to private sector voices, and even in Scape, trying to hear the voices of the tenants, the managing agents, the industry around us, the stakeholders around us, as well as Scape itself and ministry and above ministry. Deep listening is imperative if you are to navigate and you are to be able to align and bridge. If not, you're going to miss something, and you're more prone to a lot more blind spots. So I have found that as I move along now, actually it's maybe time is better spent just zipping up and listening and stop imposing your views, or be quick off the mark to say something. Those are my quick thoughts, Martin.
I just want to sort of stretch that a little bit further, right? Because I'm mindful that sometimes for us who, we have worked now for 10 years compared to the audiences who haven't started work or maybe just starting work. There is this tendency in us to say that, hey, unless I sort of jump into the conversation, or be noticed, or to be seen as engaging. So listening isn't a skill that we teach in school, right? Now we are really teaching them to be engaged and so on and so forth, which has always been my constant worry in our education, that, we sort of teach them what to say. We don't teach them how to listen and process, right? So what would you say to, David, what would you say to younger people starting out, having to sort of plant a marker to say, hey, actually this guy can know what he's saying, or, is active in the conversation and so on. Because we all agree that there is a need for deep listening.
I would say you are in no worse off position than I am. Really, yeah. All I would say is this: listening isn't just about hearing. Listening means trying to also elicit all the other sources of information that gives you the balanced perspective. So if you are in a social media echo chamber in your Telegram or Discord group, who else are you talking to find out about the issue at hand? What are other segments of society actually saying? Do they really care as you do? Or do they actually don't think as you do? Who is not saying anything? And are they the majority? So you got to verify. So your listening points are not just from conversations. Your listening points are from data. Your listening points are from anecdotes and what other people are saying. And when you go online and you consume, make sure you have a diversity of sources and do some corroboration. So the biggest difficulty I have at NYC in trying to listen correctly is to make sense of all the noise and triangulate, because you can have a lot of data points, and thousands of data points, but the data points can all mean nonsense if you don't sit down and make sense of it. And the sense making is not done by one person or a team. I have found that in my sense making team, the team has grown, and necessarily so because the distillation is not easy. So I just leave it as that. I'm no better off than you, but I can think of ways of how you circumvent and how you improve the listening.
So let me jump in here, Martin, by saying that I think with that deep listening, I think there's also not just about the hearing, right? It is also there's a sense of empathy too. I think that that actually is it's almost an extension, and if you don't have that, that's not deep listening already. So that becomes one of your criteria almost.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got to have that empathy. I'm not trying to get another E word, okay? But it is, all right? I mean, if there was an E word, okay, let me change energy to engagement, because that's another E word. And I think we've been talking around it, but that's a requirement. That's table stakes, right? And it supports all the others above it, right? Because everything is about engagement.
No, it's true. So as long as the E word it doesn't end with entertainment, I think we'll be fine.
Okay, I think we're good. Yes.
I think we're good. Actually, empathy is a big part of Ashoka's new paradigm of leadership, right? Because in order for social change makers, they need to feel passionate about what they believe in. And having empathy gives us the ability to listen, and more importantly, give us the ability to feel the problem at hand, the issue at hand. And as the folks start really crafting questions to ask us, one of the things about this whole concept of new leadership is the idea that it's no longer just the alpha male as a leader and just one hierarchical leaders. And a lot of what we've talked about, this idea of deep listening, this whole creation of a shared meaning, this whole engagement, this whole seeding space and so on, are really part and parcel of that, where the consensus or rather, let me frame it this way, that the ability for us to be able to call on a team to work together and collaborate and really bring different points of view actually allows us to deal with the complexity of the issues at hand. Because the world is changing, and a lot of the issues now are far more complex than the world before. Now, even television is no longer the same as it was. And it allows to scale our ability to reach out. So I think, David, you made a point earlier that your sort of your sense making of the people around you is getting larger. I can't imagine a hierarchical concept to be able to listen all the way to the ground. But in the ability of working with teams and teams of teams. And earlier on, Cynthia sort of brought something to bear, and I love what she said. She said that when you're dealing with an issue, a complex issue, the new leadership or team leadership allows you to bring everybody to the table. Everyone who needs a voice can be at the table. But the question that I have for the both of you is, how do you work with a group of people? Because they are all so different. Sometimes you get people who opposes you, who say things that are contrary to what you say and where you want to go. What would your advice to someone like that be?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. I think, I think the recognition now that you need to have diversity.
Yes.
Right? You need to be able to have people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different thinking, right? So the whole different mindset, right? That's important at the table, because it then, spars, it makes you think differently, it breaks you from the mold. And that's the only way to move forward. So I think that's good. But I guess what still needs to be done is the approach in which one speaks out. Right? It's good to have the voice, everybody should have a seat at the table and be given the voice. So the idea of a circle, the idea of everybody being equal, but again, everybody has a chance to speak, but should be polite and respectful in the way in which to put forward the the comments or the ideas or the suggestions. I think that's just part of common decency, and I know it's almost an old-fashioned term, but it still applies here. So maybe and we were talking a little bit about this before. Maybe some of those old concepts of leadership may still apply here too.
Decency being one of them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Few and far between.
Going both ways. It has to go both ways.
Yeah. But and David, I want to turn to you because consensus sometimes is really hard to reach. Someone still need to make the call, right? At the end of the day, what would your advice be?
So as far as we would like for consensus around certain issues and decisions, there are many situations I've come across where the teams say, it's enough discussion. There are quite a few uncertainties, and we know we can't decide. Can you help us by just deciding? And then that's where leadership that kind of accepts that role and that risk needs to come in. Because when things go topsy-turvy, you're not going to turn around to the teams and say, you know what, this is your fault, because you made the decision. Yeah, so at some point, you do need to make hard decisions. But here's where the bridging happens and the alignment happens, is that, look, I'm going to take the risks. Are you with me on this? And if you're with me, let's go. Knowing the risks, knowing that this could fail, and I will buffer you for the failure, but back me up, please. Back me up, okay? As for opposing voices, I've found that I've always appreciated an opposing voice, but I find that it's difficult to elicit opposing voices. And the conditions I've observed where opposing voices tend to surface are in safe spaces. And what do I mean by safe space? So you as a leader will need to understand under what conditions your team will begin to surface alternate views and say, you know what, actually, this is not how I see it. But they won't say it in big settings. My observation is always done in smaller team-based settings where in the team, there's a majority of them and less of senior management or middle management in. Because there's a bit more trust and there's a bit more safety. So you need to create safety for them. If not, you are hoping for quite a difficult task. I think in some cultures, people will naturally surface. But to be honest, in our Asian culture, and Singaporean culture, we tend not to surface opposing views so readily. So the leader must create deliberate conditions for that. Quick comments, thanks.
No, that's great. I thought it'd be good to actually bring in one of the comments by Yifeng, because she said that. Oh, actually, no. I want to bring in. Is it Rahayu's comment first? Because she said that it's challenging in a non-profit organization, which mostly we face different perspective on leadership because there are 3 generations involved, which is quite true, right? I mean, to a certain extent, David, you're talking about creating safe space. And in many of the non-profits, especially in Singapore, we have the board, we have the senior management, and then we have the staff, right? And sometimes in a lot of organizations, you have literally sometimes 3 generations. I don't want to say that only board people are actually old, but I think that the point is made that it is 3 generations. How do we create a safe space for staff, perhaps, to voice dissenting opinions? What would your advice be? Because sometimes you as a leader can create a safe environment, but your board members may not, be open enough to listen to dissenting voices, right? How do you think we can navigate that?
I could start off by saying first that if you're in a position to build a board, bring in the people carefully. Then that's true.
Yes.
Don't bring in your own people. So
Mm.
I've observed boards
Very
that
good point.
are quite obviously allies of the chairman.
Yes. Yes.
The chairman has to make, or the people designing the board have to be quite open to bringing different kinds of people, more inclusiveness. Second one is maybe creating, like I said, mechanism. So if the board is multi-generation, it's quite large, you can organize the board's work, for example, in a way where you can bring a smaller setting in a subcommittee to drive the work. And I think in those settings, people are more prepared to be open to different views. But in a large group setting, tendencies are quite tough. Yeah.
Cool. Georgette, can I
Yeah,
bring you in on this?
sure.
Yeah.
I think this is where the role of, if it's a CEO or an executive director, or whoever is the head of the office, right? That bridging piece becomes so important, right? Because to be able to take the essence of thinking of the board and bring it such that you're able to, you know, translate it for the staff in a manner that they understand, that the manner that they can appreciate. I think that's that critical role. So you may have 3 generations or maybe 2 generations, but that ability, again, going back to whether it's bridging, whether it's dialogue, keeping those channels open. So the head of the organization, that role, the manager role there is critical. But I think the ability to then tie that back into the chair of the board that's the beauty. That's the sweet
Yeah.
spot.
And I think leaders set the culture of the organization. Um, one of the things that I tend to tell young people is that you won't stay young. Unfortunately, as we all attest as speakers, age catches up with you, whether you like it or not. And one day, many of you, and if not all of you, will be senior enough and you will be invited to boards, you will chair boards. My challenge to you is always remember the struggles you had when you were younger, so that when you lead organization, you build organization that you wish you had. And that's how we all get better. Because sometimes when we expect things to change immediately, it doesn't. The difficulty for young people is that when we finally reach a position where we can influence, we sort of go to the status quo and say, you know what, this has been done before, I'll just keep it that way, because change is hard. But that's what this whole conference is about. It's about change making. And if you have the ability to do that, I think that will be great. I want to bring in Yifeng's question because I think it's important. Sometimes we create an echo chamber, and her question is really how difficult it is to really surround yourself. It's easy to surround yourself with like-minded people, but it creates an echo chamber to a certain extent. What are your life hacks? And I think that's a good way of putting it. What's your life hack to be able to listen deeply and constantly stretching yourself in sense making? I thought this is a wonderful way as we bring our time to a close.
Vijay, you want to go first? No?
Nope. David.
Okay,
Go ahead.
My life hack is creating separate channels that are nothing to do with the formal work. One hack, for example, is I will go down to an organization that's maybe doing mentoring for at-risk youth, and I'll just self-invite and ask the founder, can I just join in on one of your dinners with 2 boys and just let me come and listen and be a friend. And then I hear what's happening on the ground, what are the issues, and we have dinner and they talk. I also try and meet separately with people from either partners or youth as friends. I do a bit of coaching and mentoring on the side, and there's kind of nothing to do with my formal work, not just as a means of contributing, but also hearing. So those are practical ways. You have to be intentional and make time for it. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
I'm going to agree about the intentional, because it's a conscious effort. You really have to make that effort to do this. With me, it's about also total immersion. So, and trying new things. I have to say, I've done more in the years after my corporate life and going into nonprofit space, breaking out of the mold, learning and reading up, experiencing new things. And it's been a real eye opener. Right? So you can still learn while you're not so young, and you can still absorb. And I think what it is also taking all the past knowledge, both good as well as bad, to your point, Martin, remembering the things that weren't as positive as you had hoped, and then applying it, with a different lens, to the new experiences that you've absorbed and you've just learned or just been acquainted with. And then saying, okay, how do I use this? How do I channel this to make things better and make change for that matter? So that I think is the guiding principle behind it all.
Very cool. I'll just take the opportunity to share one life hack, or a life hack, to answer the question. I found that humility is a really, really big asset to have as leaders, because once you realize that you can be wrong, you are always out to find better answers. We as leaders do not have all the answers. We really don't. We rely on people around us to give us better answers. And that will allow us to bring in much more competent people than we are. Realizing that as a team, when you get the best answers from the best people that are not from you, and you understand and you agree with it and you move together, you not only create ownership, you create a sense of team, because it's no longer just what does the boss say or what does the leader say. It's really what he agrees and actually engender together. And it starts with humility, the ability to say, you know what, I may be wrong. One of the hack that I do personally is on my Twitter. I ensure that I have people that I hate that I follow. You know how you can create an echo chamber? You got to be deliberate to not be to curate a Twitter list of an echo chamber. So there are people that you really disagree with their points of views. Have them on your Twitter, follow them. It may make your blood boil, but not everything people are saying that you disagree with are wrong. So I follow American politics, for example. On my Twitter feed, I'm more of a Democrat than a Republican. I have Republican people on my Twitter feed just to understand what the argument is. Even in Singapore, I have friends who are in opposition as friends in the PAP, for example, because everyone has a common vision, and the common vision is really a better Singapore. There are different ways of seeing the issue. How do we actually listen to both sides? And I found that humility plays a big part, just knowing what we don't and being able to live
Then
with
it
that.
becomes a reflection of yourself and your ability to be taking all that, distilling all that, making your own choices and decisions based on everything around you, not just your own vision.
Yep. That's a good way. Yes, David.
Can I just quickly answer Pei Fang, who asked about compact?
Yes.
And the reason why I see compact as something bigger than just trust is because compact is about a shared journey for a shared goal. And it incorporates people with different views that may or may not necessarily trust one another, but they agree, for example, in Singapore, that we have a shared goal to work towards. I will journey with you, notwithstanding my difference in your views.
That's cool. A shared goal, a common purpose. We can talk until a long time. This conversation can just keep going and going and going. Unfortunately, time always catches up with us. But new leadership at the end of the day is really our ability to pull people together, the collective action. And if you hear from David and Georgette, it's really about the ability to empathize, to listen, to build bridges, and the ability to seed space. And I really, really like that. So thank you so much, Georgette, David. It's been such a pleasure just having this conversation with you. We could have done this over a coffee shop, but instead we have 40 over young leaders that is really joining us. So thank you very much. Please give them a big round of applause. I'll pass the time back to Dian.